Hi, I'd like to welcome you to week one of the St. Aidans Institute course on Anglican theology. Now, theology for non-Roman Catholics should be a pretty straightforward affair. Ever since the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, the argument has always been that we want to go back to the early church. In fact, today in evangelical Protestant circles, you will hear talk of people wanting to build an Acts 2 church, with Acts 2 referring to the second chapter of the book of Acts and what the early church was like at about the time of Pentecost. Great in theory, but in practice it hasn't quite worked out that way. And most Protestant denominations end up looking to the person they identify as sort of their founder to draw their theological inspiration from. So, for example, if you are a Lutheran, you will go back to the writings of Martin Luther and from there build a theological system. If you are a Baptist or Presbyterian or Reformed church person, you are a Calvinist, and you'll go back to the writings of John Calvin, especially his Institutes of the Christian Religion, and out of that build a theological system. If you are a Methodist or Wesleyan or Nazarene or part of the holiness tradition, you go back to John Wesley and his writings and sermons, and out of that build a theological foundation. For the Church of England and the English Reformation, things went a little differently. If we were to have followed that pattern, you would argue that we would be Cranmerians, following Cranmer, who wrote the first Book of Common Prayer. And we would look to him as our founder, but we don't. And there's a reason for that. The early English reformers wanted to really make a concerted effort at identifying with the early church. And so rather than building a theological system that then served as a foundation for Anglicanism, they instead focused their attention on the patristic period, the period of the church fathers, the first several hundred years of the church with some of the really, truly great writers of early Christianity, as well as the first several ecumenical councils, where a lot of the doctrinal debates of the early church were resolved. And not only that, but our understanding of the Bible as we see it today, or as constructed today, was finalized. And so Anglicans always want to go back to the patristics to really gain an understanding of what we want to build our theology upon. Now, at St. Aidans Institute, we have an entire course on patristics. It was taught by Dr. Fairfield last summer and will probably be offered again next summer. And it's a course that can take, it's a subject that can take a lifetime to master. But we don't want to do that in this class because there's other pieces that are important to Anglicans that need to be examined as well. So the way we've structured this course is different from the way a lot of people do. A lot of seminaries and programs will look at Anglican theology either as patristics, and they study the patristics, or as English history. And so they'll go through a history of the great writers of English theological reflection. In this class, I'm going to try to capture a bit of each of this. So our first couple of weeks will be spent on the patristics. You'll get a feel for some of them, see some of the arguments they had and how they addressed them. We will then look at some of the English and Anglican distinctives in terms of life and practice of the church that are important for us to be able to articulate and differentiate against other denominations. And then we'll look at some of the great Anglican writers and look at some of their own writings to get more of the flavor of how we identify and function as Anglicans. So we're going to cover a lot of territory in a rather short time, but it's important to maintain the big perspective picture in that Anglicans really do look to the early church to gain an understanding and to be sure that we're standing on solid theological ground when we do this enterprise. So if you find this course interesting, you really want to pay special attention to taking the patristics course when this is done. So this week we're going to reflect on why 21st century Christians really do need a grounding in the early church fathers, and we're also going to look at the first of the great debates, and that is on the nature of the Trinity and how it was seen then and how that informs how we understand the Trinity today. Alrighty, God bless you and have a great week, and I'll see you in the classroom.